Howdy, good morning. I I come from the Stellat'en First Nation. I belong to the Beaver Clan. Um, we're heading out to a ceremony in my community to commemorate five individuals who passed away from the in the last few years, including COVID. And so we're doing a kind of a let and go ceremony for those individuals. And I think the majority of them are attended the Lejac Indian Residential School, and I think from this group, I think you probably have a lot of the background of the origins of the residential schools through the Indian Act, through colonization, through the doctrine of discovery that was created by the Catholic Church. Lejac was run by the Catholic Church, priests and nuns and brothers. Before I go further, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the Stellat'en Dene traditional territory that's around Prince George. We have always known it as Lately for thousands of years, or since time immemorial. Prince George is the name that was given to it recently, about 100 years ago, maybe. So its colonial name was Fort George, Prince George. And a lot of our indigenous people are calling the places their traditional names that the land names itself. We don't name it after people, or like you've got place names that are named after explorers and things like that. So where I come from is Natley Bun. Natley Bun means the lake where the salmon return. The Europeans changed the name to Fraser Lake after Simon Fraser. Simon Fraser was in our territory um, about 200 years ago and could not have survived without the people from Natley. Back then, we really had winters, minus 60, minus 70 would be the norm for the winters. And he was able to survive because Natley people helped him. Without the Natley people, there would have been no Fraser Lake, no Simon Fraser University, no Fraser River, all of those names. Fraser River in our language is Taco, meaning many rivers join together. So a little bit of my history. Education-wise, I attended Lejac and I graduated from the local public high school in 1979. I attended the college in New Caledonia where I teach briefly, and then I went on to get a bachelor's degree from UBC in Vancouver, and then I got a master's degree from Gonzaga University in Washington State. But a lot of my experiences have been around working with survivors who were seeking compensation for their attendance of residential school. So I would have to sit with survivors who would tell their stories to the Canadian government. And in order to seek compensation, they had to include a lot of detail, meaning they had to relive their traumas that they went through. So I've sat probably 250 to 300 hearings. I've heard thousands of stories from survivors from across the country. Some really heart-wrenching stories that came after Kamloops found a 215. I manned a crisis line and got calls from across the country, and survivors were brave enough to share their stories. And it is quite horrific, the things that went on. The one lady out of Quebec described being raised in a convent. Convent's supposed to be a place where nuns reside, Catholic nuns. And in this case, she didn't describe it as a residence. She described it as a brothel for the priests and brothers. And the nuns would set up young children for them at this site. So that's one of the things. I mean, reconciliation is learning about those things. Reconciliation is learning the truth of our survivors who are here today. One survivor shared with me a story of something that's called the shoebox babies. This is where she witnessed, other girls witnessed, and um, the girls that got pregnant from the priest, and if they were to go full term, they knew exactly what would happen. What would happen is that after the baby was born, the baby was taken by the priest and nuns, and she would witness the priest and the nuns going out into the field with a shoebox. So the baby was put in a shoebox, and they would dig a shallow grave and they would put the baby in the grave. So to me, reconciliation is learning those hard truths. And you need to hear the truth before you can reconcile. And how do we as Canadians reconcile for those atrocities? Without knowing the truth. And many people have their truths being told. And many people, our people in our area are doing a search at the school that I attended. We're doing a search. We did ground penetrating radar and magnetometry. So we will probably have numbers of anomalies. Ground penetrating radar is not a bone detector. So anomalies meaning that there is possibly a grave underneath these kind of readings that they find. And we don't know the numbers yet, but when we're ready to do a press release, then we'll find out what the numbers are. Williams Lake has a video called Sugarcane. That's a new documentary that's coming out. I encourage everybody to watch that. Bones of Crows is a movie that was put out by one of the local ladies from here in Prince George. She was raised here in Prince George and has done movies in Hollywood. And her name is Grace Dove. So what I do is teach and I inform students. A lot of them in the past few years did not hear about residential schools until I talked to them. But it's getting better now. Some of the students that I get from in the college come from the high schools and they say, yeah, we touched on residential schools. My own experience with my dad, he did a lot of drinking. He never spoke of the schools. He went to Lejac and he went to Kamloops. He graduated in 54. And so probably around the times he was there were children being buried on the grounds there. Never spoke of his experiences, never shared, so I didn't really hear about what he went through. He passed away from drinking. His usual weekend activity was on Friday. He would go to the bar in Fraser Lake, and then he would drink all weekend. But when he passed away, he went to the bar, started to walk home, which is 5 kilometers away. And he had only gotten halfway, exactly halfway, and a pickup truck didn't see him on the road because of oncoming traffic and struck and killed him. That was back in 1979, March 17th. And for myself, I've done a lot of work on myself. Even though I did go to the residential school, I was not like my dad or my grandmother. The residential school is only 10 kilometers away from my home. So they would pick us up in a school bus, and they would drop us off at the school. And then we would get on the bus and go home at 3 o'clock. Um, but my dad's story, I heard his story through people he went to school with at Lejac, and they shared the horrific, brutal physical and sexual assaults that they endured. And I knew my dad was not immune to that. He went through the same thing. And um, he helped me a lot because even though he didn't talk about Lejac, he brought me there to talk to the supervisors that were supervising me. And the main one he talked to was Ed Fitzgerald. Ed Fitzgerald is a notorious pedophile. He took care of boys between 5 and 8 years old. And my dad took me straight to him and said, "This is my son." And I went off to play, and then um, after that, Ed Fitzgerald never crossed my path. However, a lot of people that I went to school with, they were raped by him. They were sexually abused by him, and he left me alone because I think my dad threatened to shoot him or something if he touched me. So my dad knew what was going on, knew that these things were going on, and he was making sure that his kids weren't subjected to any of that. My own experiences at the school, very early on would be, I think, the grade 2 teacher. She was a nun, Sister Mary Patrick. In hindsight and in stories from other students, would describe her as a very bad pedophile. And my cousin, who was in Lejac a year ahead of me, so he was in grade 2 already when I started. And then when I got to grade 2, he was still in grade 2. I left the school and went to a different school in grade 3, and he was still in grade 2. So he suffered at her hands for 3 years, being sexually abused. So, we have lots of stories like these that are not public. It's really hard to get survivors to really come out and say what happened to them. You'll see evidence of it if you go to the National Center of Truth and Reconciliation website. They do have, if you're going to do research, they do have the TRC hearings recorded, the public hearings, and they last anywhere from 2 to 3 days. And all of it is survivors describing what happened to them. They also had private recordings that would last 2 hours. They had lots of time you could tell your story. But there's many books, there's many many movies. National Film Board has We Were Children. That's a really good one. Indian Horse is another one that describes the residential school experience. Bones of Crows, I mentioned. The documentary Sugar Cane is going to be a very powerful one that's going to be released. And I think, all of this goes to Orange Shirt Day. And I'm really glad that you're using orange shirts and you're going to participate on that day, September 30th. There's other class actions that are happening that are the Indian Residential School Survivor Society support. They've done Indian day schools, and they've done Indian Residential Schools day scholars. That's over and past, but Indian Hospitals is up and coming. Um, a couple of days ago, you might have watched the Canadian Medical Association apologize for the treatment of Indigenous people. They described the racism, and when they first created Indian hospitals, I know the hospital I was born in had an Indian side and a white side in Vanderhoof. And so these are, things that I remember and have experience with. Speaking of the Pope, yeah, I did see him in Edmonton, and a lot of our people really are indoctrinated with the Catholic dogma. I'm not. I don't follow the Catholic faith, even though I was born into it. I don't um, acknowledge it as being legitimate for me, um, because of what happened to my father and my grandmother and many people, and at the hands of people like the Pope. And so I don't follow that. I do follow traditional practices that are not a religion. I participated in sweat lodges and a fasting ceremony. And the fasting ceremony was a spiritual ceremony where we get a lot of healing, we get a lot of visions for healing. And I fasted. The reason I fasted, and I told the medicine man that was hosting the fast, was that I wanted to fast to um, be able to have the strength to work with survivors and hear their stories without any repercussions of anger and sadness. And because those stories are not mine, those belong to the survivors. But I learned from it, and I healed, and I continue to work with survivors. And I will continue until, I know I know through education is what's going to help us out, because that was education that is what got us into it in the first place. Those are the words of Murray Sinclair, who was the chairperson of the Truth and Reconciliation. So, yeah, just go out and learn about the local experiences of survivors. In the Lower Mainland, the school would be St. Mary's in Mission, BC. I attended the only one day attendance at St. Mary's in Vancouver was I stayed there overnight on my way back from Spokane, Washington. Um, we attended a World's Fair in 1974, and I stayed overnight in Kamloops on our way to Spokane, Washington. I got to see the city of Seattle before I even set foot in Vancouver, which was kind of neat. Um, for myself, healing came through the sweat lodge and attending sweat lodges, but also on the anniversary of my dad's passing. He passed away on March 17th, 1979. So on March 17th, 2000, I chose to stop using alcohol. So that's 24 and a half years ago now, going on 25 years. But so rather than an anniversary of my dad's passing, I make it a positive anniversary where I've stopped using alcohol. And so that's my children today don't have never seen me use alcohol or drugs. And my oldest son would be the only one that witnessed all of that, but he does not use alcohol or drugs either, because that's what he chose to do. Because of what he's seen, he said, "Nope, I don't need that in my life." Other than that, our people are resilient. There's lots of hope with the young people. They're going to school, they're getting educated, but we're losing a lot more young people as well because of the opioids and suicides and things like that. But we do have doctors, we have lawyers, social workers, teachers that are coming out and um, in our population, we have four medical doctors. We have four medical doctors in the last 20 years, so that's pretty neat. And I'll stop right there. And if you have any questions and maybe comments, I could go for an hour and a half. Thank you for listening.